Broly hated to admit it, but, for the first time he had been the deceived. Shit, this son of a bitch has been gaining time all this time while in an almost imperceptible way he has been stealing the vital energy of every living thing around him, including me. I thought that he needed physical contact to do it with humans because of the corpse I saw in his hooves. Was that also part of his plan to deceive me? Damn fucking goat. Jeff Yuf difty hands off me, Broly said barely with some difficulty because Moro's hand prevented him from speaking. Even if he was a magician and his appearance didn't seem very powerful, all this was facade. Moro with his ability to steal and devour the energy of the planets and all his beings was able to increase his power without the need of hard training. So strong was his physical power that even when the sacred Kaioshin sealed his magic, even so he was able to give a hard fight to the sacred Kaioshin and the South Kai, who was equal or even superior in combat strength than Kid Buu. Moro's combat power was on similar level to that of a Super Saiyan 3. Compared to Broly's current combat power in True Saiyan, which is equivalent to a normal Super Saiyan, was evident who was the strongest. Shit, he's stealing my energy. Fuck my oath and my pride as an amateur magician. I must use my Kin again before I run out of energy, if not I'm really fucked up. Broly, who had been suppressing all of his Kin abilities until now, except on one occasion to eject certain items, reactivated his powers completely, especially those related to his 3 realms. The first thing he obviously did was teleport quickly a few meters away from Moro which, seeing him reappear near his location, sent him an energy wave from his hand. However, to his surprise the attack went through his body, as if Broly had become intangible. He still had tricks up his sleeve. Well, that doesn't matter now. You should have used them before, now there's no way you can beat me without energy, and in a few seconds there will be nothing left. However, Broly, by reactivating his Kin, not only regained the skills of his 3 realms and increased all his abilities without the need to increase his fighting level, he had also regained his more developed Nen ability, the En, which expanded to several light years in diameter. Although he didn't have to go that far to see, something that made him lose his temper. What is this? Moro asked himself looking at Broly. Despite that for Moro a few moments ago, Broly looked like a poor and helpless animal without any claws about to be sacrificed. Right now he seemed to be the most dangerous, malevolent, twisted and bloodthirsty creature in the universe. Fear. Horror. Moro for some incomprehensible reason was feeling a terrifying fear due to the dark and murderous aura that Broly was shedding. He was so terrified that his legs were shaking, and he couldn't help but retreat slowly. How can it be that I am afraid of him? What is this aura? It's as if my blood freezes. It's like, if it were in front of the death itself. There wasn't even a trace of kindness or cheerfulness left on Broly's face, only hatred and bloodlust. For the first time since he was born, Broly really wanted to kill someone. Jaco's spaceship. Tights? Tights. What's happening to you? Get up. Get up please. What is happening to you? Don't do this to me please. Please. Tell me something. Please breathe. Jaco screamed desperately as he grabbed Tights, which have no sign of life. Sacred World of Kai. Seconds after the solar explosion. While everyone continued to watch anxiously the thrilling combat between Moro and Broly, Shin, that several hours before disappeared to undertake his intertemporal trip, returned exactly at the same point where he disappeared, and by the expression on his face didn't seem to bring very good news. Shin. What a relief that you are well. You won't believe everything that happened while you weren't there, Kibito said, approaching his boss to check if he was injured. Yes, don't worry, I haven't exposed myself to any danger. What hap? Shin said, trying to push the exaggerated Kibito away from his personal space. Get to the point. Kampa shouted because he had lost all his patience for waiting so long. What have you discovered in the other timelines? Exactly. What happened to Broly-sensei? Is he really a time traveler? Kibito asked again, invading Shin's personal space in search of answers. Under the pressure of everyone present, Shin began to recount everything that happened to him and saw. Broly-sensei. Well, when I traveled to the other timelines, the first thing I did was go to see Whis and explain the situation. Then, as we planned, we investigated the Broly of that timeline, and although it wasn't easy since he was on a very remote and inhospitable planet, we found him. As far as we could see, King Vegeta, jealous of his potential, exiled Broly on an abandoned and extremely dangerous planet months before the destruction of planet Vegeta, and from that day until the moment when we were able to investigate, along with his father, he had never left that planet since its spaceships was destroyed. The same thing happens in all the timelines that I have visited. There is no doubt. Our Broly is a real anomaly. Kampa then recovered his spirit after waiting so long, and using all the neurons in his brain he said, then the Broly of our timeline is the anomaly, and therefore is a time traveler. There's no doubt about it. However, Shin, far from agreeing to Kampa's comment, responded with great concern, just like when he feared the resurrection of Majin Buu, I'm afraid it's not as simple as it seems. Hey, what do you mean? They all asked at the same time. Whis and Vados noticed that something very unsettling was about to be revealed, something for which no one was prepared or could not even imagine. Shin, after sighing and thinking several times how to explain what he had discovered, began to relate once more what he saw. It is true that the history of the Broly of our timeline has changed drastically, but nevertheless, there is something that has changed more than the own story. It's Broly himself, he doesn't seem to be the same person. They all exclaimed at once. As for power, the Broly of the other timelines as well as ours, also have an unusual power, and according to Whis' own words, he has a latent power inconceivable to any mortal, but even then there is no point of comparison between their Brolys and our Broly. While the power of those Broly is not enough to confront Frieza, ours is capable of battle a god of destruction. The Broly of the other timelines only has the Oozuru transformation, which cannot control, while ours has many insanely powerful humanoid transformations. Our Broly has very strange magical powers, but in the other timelines he doesn't have any of that. Shin said while Kampa, Vados, Whis, and Kibito kept listening with stupefaction and with their ears wide open. As for his personality, the Broly of our timeline is someone extremely intelligent, so intelligent that he seems to have been born with knowledge, so intelligent that he is capable of creating spaceships from the age of 2, so intelligent that he is able to plan everything down to the smallest detail to achieve what he wants. In addition, his personality is that of a somewhat joking, Machiavellian and cynical person. He's not evil but neither good. While the Broly of the other timelines is a child with an average intelligence for a child his age, maybe a little lower, he barely knows how to react to his surroundings unless it's directly related to his survival, and his personality very simple and kind. I have rarely seen someone with such a pure heart. Shin continued speaking until at that moment Kampa, who thought he was hearing the biggest nonsense of his life, exclaimed, Broly? Pure heart. This is the biggest nonsense I've heard in my life. Vados, trying to reassure Kampa, asked, Shin, with this we can conclude that someone, Broly or not, has modified time in some way and has introduced knowledge in Broly since the moment he was born, or that someone has supplanted the body of the real Broly. True. Shin nodded once again and replied with cold sweat on his forehead, it's a possibility, but, there's still more, there's something even more disturbing in our Broly, something that cannot be explained with a simple time trip to deliver knowledge, or possess a body. Our Broly is the only one who has a third eye. From the moment he was born, no one else has one. At that moment there was complete silence. This fact further complicated the difficult theory that Broly was simply a time traveler. So, did someone travel back in time, genetically modified Broly's fetus to have a third eye and gave him strange knowledge and skills never seen before? Without any of us noticing and without leaving any trace? Asked Kibito, which was about to have a mental collapse. All this was too strange, absurd and creepy. Whis and Vados with great seriousness tried to calculate the possibilities that all this could be happening in its background, and after several seconds trying to find an explanation, decided to increase the information they already had. It is certainly a very bizarre case. We know that Broly is an anomaly, although we don't know yet whether there are other anomalies. Also we don't know if all of this is premeditated or not, nor who has been responsible or the method that he used to do this, or his goal. I'm afraid we'll have to make a few more trips, although this time to the future, to see if we can find any clues. Although I fear this will be much more difficult, laborious and dangerous, Vados said to Shin, so he could use the time ring again to travel to the future of all timelines. Therefore, he could find some trace of the mastermind and his goal. At that moment Shin, very terrified, like when he saw Majin Buu revive or like when Goku was about to cause the extinction of the 12 universes by speaking disrespectfully to Zeno-sama, said with cold sweat all over his body, I've already tried it, but it hasn't been possible. You already tried? Do you mean that you haven't found anything in the future? Kampa asked while the rest of the audience watched with disappointment, because Shin was unable to get that information and for not informing them that he had already gone to the future. Shin at that moment with great fear and determination responded, no. I meant that I tried to go to the future, but it has been impossible. I am not able to go. It's as if something prevented me from going to the future. To any future. At that moment everyone, including the two angels, felt fear like Shin. Okay, that's scary, Whis said, not knowing what to say or think. Broly felt a great hatred. Hatred towards Moro for cheating and humiliating him for a few moments, and for killing Tights as a simple collateral damage. Hatred towards Jocko, for putting Tights in danger stupidly. But above all, hatred towards himself. Since he reincarnated in this world, everything has been relatively under his control. Nothing has ever represented a real challenge, he has never known a real defeat. He has never lost anything. He chose how to be born, with all the privileges and the necessary means to guarantee his survival and superiority. He knew the coming events, and with that, he planned from the moment of his birth his way to greatness. Even before leaving the incubator, he had already become the king in the shadow of one of the most powerful planets in the universe, playing with whoever he wanted, dominating their minds to work for him, stealing information from the greatest tyrant in the universe. He even used one of the most infamous gods of destruction to increase his power and ability and subsequently escape from the planet before its destruction. Everything went perfectly. He believed himself the king of the world. For years with total tranquility he acquired and created a great amount and variety of skills, years in which he spent making pranks to divinities of the whole universe. The normal gods had no choice but to endure him, he was above that. He traveled to another universe in search of a greater power as planned from the beginning, and manipulated that entire universe to fulfill his objectives. He acquired the Super Dragon Balls, just as he had planned. He used Frost to fight Hit, acquiring new transformations and kidnapping them, just as he had planned. With that he caused a universal commotion to attract Kampa, he hurt him, and using Fuwa as a shield he got samples of the Hakai, the DNA of two gods and the Patera, just as he had planned. Everything went according to his will. He believed himself the ruler of all the universes. Shortly after returning from Universe 6, he reached the power of a god or even beyond that, either in this or his own universe. With Beerus asleep, he believed that nothing in the Universe 7 could cause him any problems. His power knew no limits, his abilities were mysterious, practical, extensive and even invincible, his material, intellectual and human resources were unlimited, and he knew all the transcendent events that would happen. The universe was a box of toys and he was a capricious child who could do what he wanted with total freedom and impunity. Nothing was a challenge for him, nothing could surprise him or affect him. He believed himself the most powerful god of all the universes, he believed himself invulnerable, invincible and that he had everything under his control. However, today he received a huge blow to his unbridled ego. Exactly the first time he faced an enemy he didn't know about the manga or anime, an enemy with unknown skills to him. Exactly the first time he considered himself invincible and didn't quickly defeating a problematic adversary, not showing his real power and skills, lengthening the fight to have fun and show off. He lost miserably, being deceived and losing the power that he was so proud of, due to his arrogance. I've become the kind of idiot I hate the most, the one who thinks he knows everything and who is capable of anything even at low performance. An idiot still vulnerable and ignorant, but who thinks himself invincible and omniscient. Exactly the first time he decided to socialize with other people who weren't static characters tied to a single place. Exactly the first time he met someone who treated him like a friend since he came to this universe. Exactly the first time he took responsibility for someone's safety. That person died, when he could have done many things to avoid it, a person whom he cherished, whom he promised to protect, a person who wasn't destined to die died because of him. I thought I was a god capable of controlling everything and everyone, and this is what happens. I'm a fucking joke, and I have shown it at the first opportunity. The first time I faced something unknown I made a fool of myself like another idiot anime character. Tights is dead, and if I were another I would also die. Broly hated himself. And he had to unleash that immense hatred. Broly, with great fury, used the little energy he had left to teleport from his formless realm to his stomach a senzu bean while he was deeply relieved to still have this magical food in his dimension. If it weren't for that, today he would be defeated. Senzu bean was digested at high speed in his stomach and in a matter of 10 seconds, all the wounds recently caused by Moro were cured, but above all, he recovered all the energy that was stolen. What? What is this? Moro shouted when he saw that the tiny but terrifying aura of Broly had increased in an abnormal way, as if Broly had instantly recovered all the energy that he had stolen with so much effort. And that terrible and immense aura lashed and spread violently to the entire planet, causing an earthquake that went out of any measurable scale and killing with the pressure all traces of the little life that remained on the planet. I'll kill you. Moro. Broly screamed in a terrifying way as he suffered great physical changes due to his great hatred. While he was in his transformation of true Saiyan, his eyes turned yellow and his muscles increased drastically, returning again to his true Super Saiyan full power transformation, but that wasn't the end. The fur and hair of his whole body began releasing golden flashes intermittently. Until in an explosion of golden light, his whole body was dyed with the same color, including his tail, and his long true Saiyan hair bristled a little more. Broly had reached his long-awaited true legendary Super Saiyan due to the hatred he felt for himself and the same time his great self-esteem. That was the state of mind necessary to achieve his new evolution, an evolution with a power equivalent to the legendary Super Saiyan full power. Without wasting time in unnecessary chats, Broly started his attack. Aha! Under pressure. Move point. Hey! What is happening? Since when have I arrived here? At the same time, Broly increased the gravity and tele-transported Moro a few inches away from him. At the speed of light he punched Moro in the stomach, that throwing him thousands of kilometers and disintegrating his whole trunk in the process, leaving only his head and limbs, destroying the ground as if they were meteorites. Boom! 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 However, within a few seconds of striking savagely against the ground, Moro's trunk was completely restored and reassembled. Without losing a second, Moro returned to perform his technique of planetary energy manipulation to take every last drop of energy that was left to that half-dying planet to create a perfect sphere of energy around him to protect himself from the possible attacks of Broly, but... Plaff! Aw! Broly's muscular right arm appeared in the small space of the barrier and pierced Moro's chest, which was screaming in pain. At that moment, while Moro tightened his abdominal muscles and used all the strength of his arms and telekinesis to immobilize Broly's floating arm to absorb his energy more quickly. The arm once again increased its muscle mass, enlarging the hole in Moro's stomach and deforming his body to painful limits. However, his arm wasn't only increasing in size and power, the color of his golden fur was also changing, once again. All the fur on his body was turning green, his eyes were completely white and his muscles were even bigger and rockier than in his legendary Super Saiyan full power state. And as for his power, if the legendary Super Saiyan has a multiplier of 2400 and the legendary Super Saiyan full power has a multiplier of 24,000. A mortal power never before witnessed in the universe 7. Slash. With a casual upward movement of his right arm still embedded in Moro's body, he tore and shattered everything in its path. Abdominal muscles, ribs, spine, esophagus, skull. Broly pulled his arm out of Moro's body, destroying everything except his limbs and pelvis. However, in a few moments Moro, whose head had been pulverized, was completely regenerated. However, that didn't please Broly, so he created an explosion of energy around him, destroying everything in his path. The first thing that impacted with the explosion of energy was evidently Moro, which was being dragged by that explosion, being destroyed and regenerating continuously at great speed. This is crazy. Since when there are beings like him in the universe? I cannot believe that there is something with such power and energy. He. Power and energy that will feed me until I leave him dry. Moro, still on the surface of the explosion of energy as if it were a bug crushed against the glass of a car that was moving at 300 km/h, opened its mouth and began to devour the energy of the explosion while he was still being dragged and mutilated by it. More energy. I am getting closer and closer to my physical plenitude. As Moro devoured more energy, his speed of recovery increased, as well as his body rejuvenated and gained some muscle. He was becoming increasingly powerful and young. Until, a lot of ki punch that seemed to have passed as if nothing through the powerful and unbreakable explosion, hit Moro, especially in his head, destroying it completely and preventing him from absorbing more energy. Broly had used Hit's time skip for the first time in combat since he learned it. Boom! After several seconds in that apocalyptic landscape, with great pain and difficulty, Moro came back to life again thanks to the few living cells of himself that he had scattered through the atmosphere before the explosion. Damn I. However, Moro stopped his complaints, as he noticed a large shadow behind him, a terrifying shadow that seemed to swallow all traces of light. Turning, he saw Broly's semi-titanic simian body, observing him with his 3 eyes with contempt and disgust, as if he were an insignificant and disgusting insect that deserves nothing more than to be crushed. Moro, alerted by the mighty giant and his huge power, but not scared in the least, shouted and laughed with great arrogance. Ha. Haven't you noticed yet? You cannot kill me. I can regenerate and resurrect as many times as I want. Do you know how many times they have tried to kill me in these last 10 million years in that prison? Why do you think I'm still alive? I have absorbed the vital energy of more than 100 whole planets and devoured billions of souls during the process, billions of souls that you will have to extinguish before you can kill me. However, that will be impossible for you. Before you can kill me 1,000 times, I will have devoured all your energy 10 times. Come on. Recover your energy again. It doesn't matter how much strength and energy you have. It's better for me. Before me all that is useless. Your fate is die in my hands and make me stronger. Shut up Alucard's poor excuse that cannot even absorb 20% of the energy that steals. PLAF. 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 Without Moro could see even how it had happened, his limbs had disappeared and because of that, he fell to the ground like a stone. What? But the most surprising, terrifying and exasperating thing for him was that, he couldn't regenerate his limbs, no matter how hard he tried. What is happening? What have you done to me? He screamed in real panic as he watched his terrifying opponent, who had changed again in appearance once again to a less muscular and red humanoid ape, which had his torn limbs flying around him. I cannot kill you. And who decided that? Said Broly Super Saiyan God with a raised hand forming a sphere of and disintegrated with Hakai energy Moro's limbs, preventing his regeneration thanks to his ability to suppress the effect of all cause. Another transformation. Shit. I need to absorb his energy faster. However, Moro noticed something that plunged him into the deepest despair. Impossible. I'm not able to absorb energy. What have you done to me? What are you? You will devour all my energy. And who decided that? Broly said with more anger and contempt as his muscles expanded again, multiplying his powers several times, reaching his new and most powerful transformation in all aspects. The true Super Saiyan God full power, although Moro wasn't able to notice the power of a god. Omega Ragnarok Nova Star. This cannot be true, this is impossible. This cannot be happening. I'm going to die. Moro thought, aging again by the fear as he watched the most immense concentration of energy he had ever seen, a threatening and terrifying sphere of green and red color energy bigger than the same planet they were on. So big and heavy that was distorting all the gravity around him, pulling out of its orbit several nearby planets and satellites and causing that the planet where they were began to be attracted towards the sphere. The only one who gets to decide such things is me, said Broly True Super Saiyan God full power as if he were a god watching an ant. NGH. AH. Ahahaha. Moro shouted hysterically with his mouth full open, watching helplessly as his extinction was close and he couldn't do anything to prevent it. Until even Broly took away his privilege of being able to emit sound with his ability to nullify the effect of every cause. Be gone. Broly launched his energetic attack. Attack that made the planet disappear, and all the dead planets and celestial objects around it too. The whole solar system disappeared. Sacred world of Kai, minutes before. The 5 divine beings remained silent trying to assimilate the terrible and disturbing situation that Shin had communicated, until someone had to speak to propose some solution. Before rushing us, I think we should check if the same thing happens in another universe. We will visit Fuwa to see if it's also impossible for him to travel to the future, Vados said, wanting to think that all this was due to a ring problem of Shin or Shin himself. And if he is also unable to travel to the future like me? Shin asked, not believing that it was due to his problem, he really felt that something prevented him from traveling to the future. Then this would be something that would surpass us, and I think we should inform Zeno-sama to find a solution, Whis proposed, who wisely chose to ask a higher instance. Upon hearing Whis' words Kampa, Shin and Kibito went into a panic even more exacerbated, as much as it seemed impossible, things could still get worse. Are you crazy? Do you have idea of what Zeno-sama could do if we bring him problems? Do you want him to get in a bad mood and wipe out all the universes at once when he finds out about this? In addition, the less people know about this the better, we cannot risk that Zeno somehow finds out because someone talked too much, Kampa screamed, shooting saliva all around him while Shin and Kibito nodded to everything he said. It was the first time that day they agreed so much on something. However, at that moment, the 5 of them felt something near where Broly and Moro were fighting. Is that? Kampa said with great surprise and disbelief. If this was a joke or a nightmare, he wanted it to end soon. Yes, there is no doubt. It's godly energy, And a huge 1-inch set was showing Broly true Super Saiyan gods on his staff, while Kibito and Shin believed they were about to faint. Both thought they had seen everything that day, but, even in their greatest illusions, would never imagine that mortal could transcended the mortals and manifested godly energy. Even less that this mortal was someone who could already fight with a god of destruction before transcending. At that moment, Kampa with great seriousness and determination as he had never had in his life said, "Vados. We cancelled the trip to see Fua. We've waited long enough, and the situation has already escalated too much. We have to do something now. Before it's too late." "As you command, Kampa-sama," Vados said as she prepared to open a wormhole. Main spacecraft of the Galactic Patrol. After the Galactic Patrol detected the unusual cataclysmic changes in the planet in which Moro and Broly were fighting, as well as the abnormal energy levels, the Galactic King alerted all the troops about to go inside that apocalypse so they could regroup in the main spacecraft. And Jaco, who was extremely weak due to Moro's massive energy theft, from which he could survive with great difficulty thanks to having a fighting power higher than most living beings in the universe, had fled before they gave that alert to regroup to the main ship, looking for all possible help to try to heal Tights. Jaco still couldn't accept or believe that Tights had died. Conversations could be heard throughout the spacecraft regarding the latest events. "Thanks to the heavens that we didn't approach to that planet to face that monster," said one of the soldiers who received the signal of withdrawal before reaching their destination. "Yes, according to what I heard, the life of 6 nearby planets was completely extinguished in few minutes." "It's scary," said another of the soldiers who read the report of the situation unlike others. "There is no end to the thing. A few seconds ago that entire solar system has completely disappeared. There isn't a single planet or star in billions of kilometers away," explained one of the employees of the intelligence center. "This is crazy. What kind of monsters have been fighting?" exclaimed with fear one of the most muscular soldiers with the roughest appearance of the Galactic Patrol. "I'd rather go back to fight against Frisia's army. At least the planets weren't destroyed, and if they were, they disappeared one by one," said one of the elite soldiers in charge of organizing the troops. And in the intensive care room, the Galactic King and the Galactic Patrol chiefs asked Jaco about everything that had happened to him. A Jaco who was being treated with special medications because of how weak he was now. A Jaco who watched with helplessness the corpse of Tights that was in front of him, answering without any arrogance to all the questions of his superiors in an atypical and almost robotic way. Until... "Hello Jaco," said Broly, true Super Saiyan God full power, appearing out of nowhere between the Galactic King and Jaco, speaking with an atypical voice devoid of any emotion. Jaco looked up at the physically quite changed Broly, and quite painfully tried to excuse himself. He said, not knowing what to say exactly, trying not to have eye contact with Broly and waiting for his punishment. However, Broly's reaction wasn't as he expected. "Don't torture yourself, Jaco, it wasn't your fault," said Broly, putting his big hand on his shoulder to calm him. Broly knew exactly how Jaco felt right now, guilty for the death of a friend for events beyond your control. Jaco blamed himself for bringing Tights with him, that he was guilty of her death, but, was Broly who really felt the greatest culprit? Because of him Moro was released, because of him Tights was in the spaceship, because of his permissiveness both could leave the spacecraft although there was danger outside, and because of him Moro could perform his stealing energy magic that would finally kill Tights. Broly couldn't blame Jaco for anything, he had no right, and more when he found that he really was as devastated as he was. While Broly was advancing towards the corpse of Tights, several soldiers at the command of the Galactic King tried to retain that strange and dangerous intruder, although before they could approach him fainted, falling to the ground like stones. Broly, undeterred by what was happening around him, put his hand on Tights' battered body and using his recovery magic restored his body to the best possible condition, although he couldn't resuscitate her, and lifted his body with telekinesis, holding her in his arms. "I've already avenged Tights, now with a bit of luck. I may be able to resurrect her in no time, otherwise we'll have to wait a little longer until it's possible." While Jaco watched Broly with stupefaction and hope, the Galactic King watched him with anticipation and fear. "Avenged? You mean you defeated Moro?" "Yes, he will no longer threaten the Universe 7. Now if you excuse me, I have things to do." "Jaco, don't say anything about what happened to Tights to his family." "I'm going to try to solve it," said Broly, making his way between the different fainted bodies on the floor, trying not to step on them, before the terrified look of all the patrollers present in that room who felt real fear towards that scion. "But not so fast. Before you go to do whatever you want to do, you have to answer some questions, if I let you go." Kampa shouted like a hustler, accompanied by Vados and Whis, which appeared directly inside the spaceship through a wormhole, making the crew of the spaceship even more nervous. They practically didn't dare to breathe. Broly not expecting too much the appearance of Kampa and the two angels at that time, but keeping it in mind as a possible scenario in which they appeared for what happened in the Universe 6. Hi Kampa, I'm sorry, but right now I don't have the time or inclination to talk with you. If you want more food or you have a complaint, contact me when all this is over, said Broly, guarding the body of Tights in his formless realm before trying to use his teleportation once more. But what Kampa said made him change his min. Not so fast Broly, if that's your real name. You are going to give me hit back and the recipes of what you cooked. And you're going to confess, or I'll make you confess, Kampa said as Broly arched his eyebrows by the confusion. If that is my real name. Confess? Has this fat cat hit his head or eaten something in a bad state that has affected his brain? Or does he refer to? I'm sorry, but I don't know what the hell you're saying, and I don't know what I'm supposed to confess. I don't think I committed any crime, or at least a serious crime. If it is for what you have found inside the food, I have to report that all that was inside the recipe to give it a better flavor, said Broly surprised, trying to remember anything bad that he could have done at the same time that he covered his back. Kampa, in a rather bad mood, shouted, What? What have you done to the food? Ahem. Kampa-sama. But Vados coughed covertly to indicate that Kampa shouldn't deviate from the stated topic of conversation. Kampa understood the intention of Vados and returned to channel the conversation to complete the goal for which they had come. Jarrrr. Stop playing dumb. We have more than enough evidence to prove that you are a time traveler. Spit everything you know right now. Upon hearing the term, time travel, all the members of the Galactic Patrol were on alert and looked at Broly with some suspicion and aversion despite being the person who had ended forever one of the greatest enemies of the universe. Time travel is something strictly forbidden and severely punished by the law of this universe. What? Me? Time traveler? Evidence? Okay. 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 Could someone with a better ability to talk explain to me what the fuck is going on? Broly asked, quite upset, since he really didn't understand what was happening. He had not made any trip in time, yet. He was totally innocent. Although his ignorance of the situation seemed convincing and realistic, Whis pretended to ignore it. He simply thought that he was a good liar. Hi Broly, how long without seeing us? You see, we recently did a little research and we realized that someone may have made some time travels and we have several clues that that time travel revolves around you. You would be so kind to answer some simple questions. We won't take much time, we just want to be sure that you're not involved, Whis said in a friendly way so that he was more willing to answer their questions and surely give more clues about his guilt upon talking with confidence. Upon hearing Whis's explanation and recalling Kampa's bellowing, Broly began to link concepts at a great speed. Kampa and Vados in Universe 6 with Whis. They talked about me. They put information in common. They discover that I know too much. Possibility that I come from the future. They investigate possible time travel. Time rings. Oh. Shit. That cannot be true. Broly felt several chills all over his body. He had a bad omen, very bad omen. A great crisis was approaching, a crisis that could destroy his future plans. Either by being found guilty of being a time traveler, being convicted of a crime he hasn't committed and destined to lead a fugitive life in which all the deities would hunt him or that they discover his deepest secret, his reincarnation. Damn. I need to know exactly what is happening. I want to prepare a good defense for this trial. And these people aren't going to give me more information than necessary, they are waiting for me to show some weakness in my argument. Although I know where to find information I need. I will gladly answer your questions, Whis, since I also want to know of what I'm being falsely accused of. Broly said, which was interrupted by a certain humanoid fat cat. Stop pretending that you don't know anything. Confess. I want to go home. Fuck, Kampa shouted, easily losing his patience at hearing Broly pretend not to know anything about. However, Broly without flinching or giving importance to Kampa's tantrum continued his conversation. But I think this isn't the right place to do it. It's a spaceship full of people who aren't involved with this, just like me. And we cannot know if the chubby will explode in anger and destroy everything for some stupid reason, so I propose to change places for this meeting. We will see where you come from. Ciao. At that moment, while Kampa tried to punch him in the face for having insulted him because of his overweight, he teleported instantly to another very distant place. Damn, he always does the same. Vados. Fast. Let's go to where he has gone. Chase him. Kampa screamed, causing moderate damage to the spaceship with his anger. Sacred world, O Kai. I'm relieved they didn't force us to go, Shin-sama, said Kibito, who wiped the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Yes, we wouldn't have helped in anything between that battle of monsters, maybe he would even use us as hostages. I don't want to get close to that Broly, it makes my hair stand on end. Shin said, seconding Kibito's opinion, trembling slightly. Calm down, Shin-sama. Here we are safe, we don't have to worry about anything. Nothing bad can happen to us, Kibito said, completely convinced. The worst had already happened for them, now Kampa would take care of everything. Hello. Shin and Kibito, I suppose. Right? Said a fairly familiar voice for both of them right behind their backs. And when they turned around they saw someone who almost made them have a heart attack. Broly. Both shouted, falling on his ass to the ground side by side. The same. I see that you already know me, this makes things easier. If you are so kind. Could you answer some questions please? Broly asked in a way neither friendly nor threatening, while Shin and Kibito hugged each other in tears because of the excessive fear they had for this powerful, mysterious, and possibly evil being. If you are so kind. Could you answer some questions please? Broly, without giving them time to answer or make shipwrecks, grabbed Shin and Kibito and dragged them to his dimension. Specifically in a fairly big spaceship within his desire realm to prevent Shin or Kibito from escaping with their Kai to another place, or Kampa to arrive before they could confess what they had discovered. Where are we? Shin asked, very scared and confused. He was the supreme Kaioshin of the Universe 7, and for some strange reason he noticed that they weren't in it, and that he couldn't use his Kai. This was very, very strange. Don't worry about that now, just try to remember why I'm being accused of a crime I didn't commit, and maybe you can go back to the Universe 7 in a while. Until then I'm afraid you'll have to stay here. Depending on how patient I am, my treatment towards you will be better or worse, and I have to warn you that I have very little patience today. Do you understand what I want to tell you? Said Broly in a rather intimidating way, moving 2 electric chairs towards Kibito and Shin. Shin quickly understood how horrible his situation was and how angry Broly was right now. A few seconds ago he had vanished an entire solar system. It wasn't wise to make him angry, so he began to recount what happened this day. He confessed to Broly how Vados, Whis, and Kampa came to their planet and told him the reasons why they suspected that Broly was a time traveler. He also told him that they had investigated in his past but couldn't find anything, so he traveled the other 2 timelines to find evidence. He told him about what he had found in the other timelines and, as a result, the theories that they had all formulated about Broly's true identity. The only thing that Shin didn't tell was about the blockade that existed in the trips to the future. He didn't want to mention that so Broly wouldn't know the whole truth. He had to avoid telling everything. It was the basics of the basics when you face someone. However, with Shin's explanation he could get a very accurate idea of what was happening, and how to act from now on. Shit. 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 Fucking shit. Fucking time travels. How could I have overlooked this? When the son of a bitch of Avalon sent me to the universe of Dragon Ball, he was referring to the Dragon Ball universe of manga and anime, exactly that universe. However, where the events take place in the manga or anime aren't the main timeline, so the incredible super mega ultra perfect Broly that I am, only exists in one timeline, the rest are normal and boring Brolys. Considering that right now there are 3 timelines and that a time travel creates a time ring. The first alternate timeline was created by a time machine utilized by a mortal from an advanced civilization in Universe 12, which later ended up in the possession of Universe 12 Supreme Kai AG. With this, we have 1 green ring representing the alternate timeline and a silver one, which existed before the first time travel, since it represents the current timeline in which one exists, and there was a timeline before, the original timeline. These are the original timeline 1 and the timeline 2. In those lines everything would be the same as the story as we know it until the arrival of Frieza to Earth, where on this occasion Goku would use his teleportation and beat Frieza and his father. Goku would die in few years with his deadly disease, and in 767 Dr. Maki would release C-17 and C-18, creating an apocalypse. Years later Trunks would use a time machine to travel to the past, creating the third timeline where he would heal Goku and get away to destroy C-17 and C-18, creating a detonator for the bombs of their bodies. That happened in the timeline 1 or 2. With that we have 3 timelines, therefore 2 green time rings plus the silver one. However, when he returned to his timeline, 1 or 2, Cell killed him, attacking him by surprise and traveled back to the year 763 to be able to absorb energy from a lot of humans and C-17 and C-18, and with that Cell creates the timeline 4, the anime/manga timeline of Dragon Ball manga, Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super. With that we have for timelines, therefore 3 green time rings plus the silver one. In the 4th line of time, being a derivation of timeline 1 or 2 was predestined for a Trunks to travel from the future to the year 764, since he did that before being killed by Cell that traveled to the past later, the future Trunks that we all know. Which would have been exactly the same as timeline 3 if weren't because here Cell traveled to the past before. At that time a new timeline was created, precisely the timeline of the Fuhrer Trunks, that until now didn't exist, the 5th timeline. Which would have been exactly the same as timeline 1 or 2 if not were because Cell traveled to the past and a Trunks traveled to a past where Cell also traveled to the past. And with this we have the 5 time rings that we see in Dragon Ball Super. 4 green time rings representing the 4 alien timelines and the silver representing the own timeline. Which means that I'm currently on line 1 or 2, which at this time is the pre-timeline 4, since Cell still hasn't arrived from the future in 763, then another time ring will be created in that date from this timeline. However, the line 3 is already reflected here despite being located in the future, because it is a timeline born from the same timeline in which I'm right now, a timeline born before the time travel of Cell, a timeline necessary for Cell to travel to the past, because if Trunks hadn't killed the androids with the knowledge of the 3rd timeline Cell wouldn't have traveled to the past. In fact, line 1 or 2 is so linked to the 3 that even a new timeline is created when Trunks travels to the past as it was predestined to do with 3 in the 1 or 2. Which means that the fucking Avalon somehow put me in the pre-timeline 4 without creating another timeline or affecting the events that happened or that will happen on the timeline 1 or 2, and as absurd as it may seem, also without what I do up to or modify create other timelines, at least until the year 763 I think. This Avalon has provoked all these temporary inconsistencies so that his intervention in this reality is not noticed, avoiding creating a new time ring. A great job, seriously, a great job, an impeccable work of engineering, and a great detail I have to add, all my respects and applause for this, but you have no finished all the job. You have not modified the other Brolys and now that is incriminating me. Fuck. I am innocent. And now these fucking bastards believe that I am the culprit of the creation of the timeline 3 that was created by the fucking Trunks of timeline 1 or 2. Fucking Avalon and his botches. Fucking Trunks of the original future and his shitty time machine. Blame them and know me. And I'm sure they'll blame me again when Cell and the other Trunks do it again. I haven't done anything. Well, technically I don't. Jrrrrrrr. Another misfortune that I didn't expect, but this also gives me more information about my situation. This means that whatever you do in this timeline won't create a time ring, nothing will change the fact that Cell will travel from the future to the past and that Trunks will do the same later. This is getting interesting and much simpler for me. But now it will be better to think of a way to justify the differences between me and the other Brolys. An excuse without fissure. Or at least, find a method that shows that I don't lie. Okay, thank you very much for your collaboration, I will take you back home. It is not good to make wait for the visitors, said Broly, and with a snap of his fingers Shin, Kibito, and himself returned at the same point where they disappeared, where Whis, Vados, and Kampa sought them by all possible means. Kampa-sama, Kibito, and Shin shouted as they ran terrified on all fours towards Kampa. Damned! What did you do to them? Kampa shouted, which showed concern, but concern for the safety of his brother Beerus, not for Shin, much less for Kibito. Although he obviously would never acknowledge worrying about his brother in public, just as his brother wouldn't either. I have simply invited them to one of my bachelor apartments to sit down to talk quietly about the time. This time literally, Broly said in a sarcastic way, as he was a little tired of Kampa's screams. That last impertinent intervention of Broly made Kampa lose his temper. I'm tired of your arrogance. Kampa yelled, advancing at full speed with his fist held high to hit Broly. But Broly was prepared for a possible reaction of the fat cat and responded with another punch right against Kampa's fist. The crash of their fists was so powerful that created a great shock wave that devastated everything in its path, so powerful that sent Shin and Kibito flying through the air without even hitting them, so powerful that made the world Kai itself falter, a world that survived without problems to Kid Buu attacks, so huge that could even be seen from space. When the dust cleared, the only thing that could be seen was a large crater, and in the middle of that great crater Broly and Kampa still crashed their fists. In the eyes of someone inexperienced, it would seem a draw since the shock of both created that explosion, and both were in the same position, but if you looked at the way the explosion expanded and how Kampa's arm trembled slightly, you could see who the winner of this assault was. the physical strength of Broly True Super Saiyan God Full Power was far superior to Kampa's. Wow, sighed with surprise, expectation and pessimism Vados and Whis, they witnessed something extremely strange in any universe or era. A mortal had overcome in strength a god of destruction, which is supposed to be the strongest mortal of a universe that has been promoted to god with a ritual that has made them even more powerful, and from what they observed, Broly hadn't used all his power. Impossible. How can a mere mortal child be stronger than me? Che, Broly smirked as he saw the shocked face of Kampa. Don't think you're so important because you have a bit more brute force than me. That doesn't determine the winner. I have hundreds of millions of years more experience than you. Kampa shouted as he prepared to kick Broly. This brings back memories, and that happened recently. Right, Kampa? Broly said confidently with his huge arms crossed, teleporting very precisely parts of his body to Formless Realm to avoid being hit by the rapid and powerful blows of Kampa. What an interesting skill, said Whis, who was paying a lot of attention to Broly's techniques. They had to know what they were facing. However, Kampa took that as a great offense, especially since he was already humiliated by Broly on one occasion not too long ago in his universe, and he hated to repeat this experience again, especially when he already knew who was facing in some of his powers. So, he went with everything from the beginning. Hakai, Kampa said, opening his palm in front of Broly's face, with an extremely intimidating attitude. Hakai, Kampa said, opening his palm in front of Broly's face, with an extremely intimidating attitude. Zie Warudo. Broly had used his Kaien ability to slow down time in a certain area just before Kampa's Hakai emerged from his hand, stopping him almost completely. Days before, the time invasion of his form realm was able to slow down Kampa about 15% while Vados wasn't even affected. Now, thanks to the increase of its power, although the slowing in each user depends on the difference between the power of Broly and the user calculated in an exponential way as if it were the increase of experience necessary to level up in each level in a video game. Kampa was slowed down by more than 70% while Vados and Whis began to notice the time invasion, although they were still not affected, but they could perceive it, since each time was closer to his domain. However, with their vast experience and knowledge, they were able to determine something. This skill is more than it seems. And in that slow time interval in which Kampa began to release his Hakai without realizing that time had slowed down for him, Broly had already moved out of the range of his destructive ability, grabbing Kampa's kitty short tail. And without the cat having time to react to the fact that Broly had disappeared from his vision field, Broly, holding Kampa by the tail, began to swing him in the air from one side to another, embedding him against the ground again after another. Pam. 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 When the brutal and rapid shake ended, Kampa remained stretched, embedded in the ground, hyperventilating, and meowing like a cat in pain, trying to analyze what had just happened. Puny God, Broly said calmly, moving away from the crater, heading towards Vados and Whis, with whom he hoped to have a much more civilized conversation to solve the misunderstanding. However, to Broly's surprise, the god of destruction Kampa was much tougher than an Asgardian god. Jarrrr. Damned. 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 Kampa shouted, rising up the floor and shining with a purple color that disintegrated everything around him. He shouted in such a powerful way that it could be heard throughout the spiritual world, and just like what happened with Majin Buu, the space was distorted around him. He had never been so angry in his life, and his intention was kill Broly. However, Broly that day had received too many surprises, so, although one of his eyes was on Whis and the other on Vados, the other was always watching Kampa. So when Kampa at ultralight speed accelerated with a Hakai punch to kill Broly, who had his back to him. Shambles. In that instant the positions of Kampa and Broly were exchanged, and due to the acceleration and the great distance that had previously existed between Kampa and Broly, Kampa flew at high speed towards Vados and Whis, which quickly dodged him in a very simple and elegant way. While Kampa was going away by inertia, Broly was preparing a new attack unprecedented until now. From each one of Broly's eyes a green laser beam shot out and merged in a midpoint, then a combined laser beam containing the strength of the three laser beams increased several times, shot against Kampa. Death Star Beam. Broly shouted with the voice of Darth Vader. However, because the attack took a few tenths of a second longer than necessary to charge and that Kampa was an expert fighter, despite being slowed down by the time invasion he was able to dodge the beam by only with a cut on his cheek. Although by dodging it, the laser beam left the atmosphere of the great world of Kai and continued its trajectory, impacting with a distant desert planet, making it explode in a second. If it weren't because there were no more planets in this trajectory, dozens of them would have suffered the same fate. If that planet didn't have a name, now was called Alderaan, said Broly, sarcastically observing the next movement of a Kampa berserker approaching him at high speed, throwing spheres of Hakai energy. Hakai spheres that couldn't hit Broly because he could dodge them easily due to slowed down time or by having them pass through his body. However, when Kampa came to him, Broly didn't resort to any of his Spaytime casuistic tricks. He decided to face Kampa with his own weapons. Exactly the same weapons. This is indeed unexpected, Whis and Vados thought as they witnessed the change in Broly's divine power. Before they couldn't see the end of the fight between Broly and Moro, where Broly performed in a very casual way a very select technique, so he caught them now by surprise. But undoubtedly they were seeing how Broly was manifesting Hakai energy, although he was weaker and controlled in a more inexperienced way than Kampa, to counterattack his attack. Boom! With that great initial punch, a long succession of attacks flew between them in a static way, while everything around him began to disintegrate at an alarming rate due to the Hakai energy of both. Until... Stop right there, Whis and Vados intervened, interposing their staffs between Broly and Kampa to stop the fight, although Vados also had to resort to hit Kampa on the head, to regain his lost sanity. Why did you stop me? That has been a lack of respect, Kampa asked in a very bad mood, rubbing his head due to Vados's blow. If you look around you, you would discover why we stopped the fight. I don't know how Broly got the Hakai energy, but even though he is not a god of destruction, if the combat had followed this rhythm it would have consequences very similar to those that could happen if two gods of destruction fought. And you know what those consequences are, right? Whis said with great seriousness, even with some anger, while he watched Broly's wicked and confident smile. Smile that made the two angels think he was waiting for Whis and Vados to interrupt the fight and reassure Kampa from the beginning. Broly, how many secrets do you hide? That Hakai energy, you acquired that time? Vados asked, remembering the moment when Broly mysteriously absorbed a Hakai sphere of Kampa energy in the 6th universe. Yes, but... Not exactly, although I learned a lot from it. It's a shame I still don't have much control of this energy. If it weren't because my power is superior to Kampa's, the hairs on my arms could have disintegrated because of that annoying purple energy. In fact, if it were Beerus it would have been possible for it to happen, said Broly, rubbing elbows with Whis, who had to nod with some satisfaction. Damned! What do you imply? Kampa shouted, feeling deeply aggrieved. What is evident? You have neglected your physique and have not trained for billions of years, Vados answered with considerable disappointment. Well, after making it clear that we won't solve anything by fighting, will we be able to reason and speak like civilized people? Or do I need to use a hostage like the last time? Broly said in a conciliatory way, making a green and chubby head appear in her hand. Ah! What hap? Oh no! Not again! Shouted this head between tears in Broly's hand. Fuea! Kampa shouted, just like a few days ago, having a deja vu. Oh wow, then he can kidnap Fuea no matter what universe he's in. This is problematic. Kampa! Please! Help him! Fuea shouted before Broly make him disappear again. Alright. Do we speak civilly or not? Broly said as if he were a negotiator, or a professional mobster. Broly had practically left them with no alternative, now everything had to be solved trying to negotiate in a peaceful way, and seeing that Kampa was still unable to quench his thirst for blood. Then Whis and Vados were in charge of the conversation, while Kibito and Shin that were hiding in the bushes came closer upon seeing that the danger had passed. I'll start, given that the theme revolves around me. Shin told me everything you talked about and investigated about me, and I must say that I am also surprised and aggrieved. I cannot believe that the Brolys of the other timelines are so pathetic, it's inadmissible, said Broly joking with a serious tone. For what you're saying? Do you still maintain that you have not made any time travel? Vados said, knocking Kampa, who was about to say and do another stupid thing, again. When he saw that Broly was nodding, insisting that he was innocent, Whis decided to continue the interrogation in a friendly way. If you don't mind, I would like you to answer some of our doubts. There have been certain moments in the past that have made us believe that you had information about the future, we would like to know what justification you have for it. Of course, without any problem, answered Broly, crossing his legs like Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct. The first time we met, you were able to determine the power of Beerus and you also knew how to make him behave in the way you liked, even it seemed that you were waiting for us. How did you know all this without information of the future? Whis asked, beginning the interrogation. Obviously I was waiting for you. You see, even in those years I was able to see and hear everything that happened on the planet Vegeta and its surroundings. Evidently I could also hear King Vegeta on certain occasions speaking between whispers and also in his nightmares about someone called Beerus. He talked about how strong he was, how little patience he had and how important it is to prepare good food for him. Of course I also heard him say that Beerus had ordered him something, a pillow I think. So almost every day I waited near that place to see if you showed up to pick up that pillow. And one day two strange beings appeared near the planet and by the description I got, the conversation you were having and the capabilities you showed, so it could only be you. I was hoping to have a good fight with someone very strong that could help me increase my power, and that's how it was, Broly answered with great conviction, naturalness and seriousness. Whis frowned. This was a reasoned and convincing explanation that could explain that part of the story, but he was still not convinced. You escaped the planet months before it was destroyed, in a way that no one could detect you and in a crucial and convenient moment. How did you know about the future destruction of the planet Vegeta? I didn't know that the planet Vegeta would be destroyed, I just left because after fighting Beerus I hadn't thing left to do in that place. I wanted freedom and tranquility, and belonged to that planet of barbarians who before leaving the incubator treated me like a weirdo was a nuisance. That's why I went to the planet Earth, which according to the data I got was a pretty planet, beautiful and quiet, Broly replied as if what he had just said was an absolute truism. Vados continued with the interrogation this time. She found that Broly's explanation was quite convincing and difficult to refute, although just as hard to believe as the previous one. But what happened in Universe 6 was more difficult to justify in her opinion. How did you know about me and Kampa and about our relationship with Beerus and Whis? Neither Whis nor Beerus told you about us or the different positions of which we belong. I had the fortune to learn about the existence of Dragon Balls, which could fulfill wishes, and my wish was knowledge, general knowledge of the universe, history, techniques, magic, technology and legendary items. With that I learned many things, such as the existence of different gods, their abilities, responsibilities, and their relationship, that there are other universes and between both universes 6 and 7 there were the Super Dragon Ball that can grant any wish, the main reason for my visit to the Universe 6. As to why I lied about knowing you and that I was best friend of your brothers, it was for you to treat me better and be more open to dialogue, and as to how I knew about your sibling relationship and how to deal with you. Fuck, you are like 2 drops of water. Broly answered again without blinking in a very natural way and without trembling in the least, as if he really believed what he was saying. Although this explanation had some sense and they began to believe that there was a possibility of everything was due to a lot coincidences. Something would be very difficult to explain by Broly. How is it possible that you were so smart and powerful as a baby? As you may already know, the other Brolys are not like you. And what is that third eye? As for my power, intelligence, abilities, and I don't know. I guess it's because I'm a strange mutation among the Scion. I don't think many people in any universe know perfectly the circumstances of their own birth, but of course I'm not one of them. As for my intelligence, I suppose it depends on my mutation, but if I know so much it is because since I was born I had an almost perfect memory and could acquire information from anywhere on the planet. So I was learning everything about everything, God things, bad things, useful things, stupid things. I acquired all the information, I kept it in my brain, I processed it continuously and I hadn't thing else to do in the incubator. I had to entertain myself with something and I only had all that knowledge and my telepathic and telekinetic powers. I'm a fucking genius. What do you want me to do? Pretend to be mediocre and not stand out for pity towards the useless people? Broly said outraged, as if he were a cute and obedient child who always told the truth and did everything right, and now his parents were scolding and doubting him for no reason. Although everything Broly was saying made a lot of sense and could explain to some degree everything that has happened, discarding the possibility of time travel. Whis and Vados had the feeling that something was wrong, so they were going to continue with the interrogation, until... Hey! I think we won't get anything in this way. No matter how reasoned and logical my explanations are, you won't believe me at all. There will always be the possibility that I am lying in your mind. How about if I propose a method to get completely out of doubt about whether I am telling the truth or not? Said Broly with confidence. How about if I propose a method to get completely out of doubt about whether I am telling the truth or not? Said Broly with confidence. Vados, Whis, Shin, Kibito and Kampa that was starting to wake up after the knockout, looked with suspicion at Broly. It was as Broly said, they couldn't be sure if what Broly said was true or not, even though it sounded very logical and convincing. It was like when a skeptic person finds scientific explanations to paranormal cases, but evidently they didn't trust too much of a Broly proposal to prove his own innocence. Oh. And what method do you propose? If it is time travel, you must know that it is forbidden, that only the Supreme Kai can travel without repercussions with the time rings, and that a strange skill of yours will not change our mind. Vados said, being skeptical. She didn't believe that there were many infallible methods to prove that Broly was telling the truth, and trusted much less if that method was being proposed by same Broly. He. Don't worry, beauty. I had no intention of traveling in time in any way. It would be absurd to be arrested for traveling in time, proving that I haven't traveled in time traveling in time. And my only useful skill to discover if someone lies or not, is to read or manipulate his mind, and I doubt that it is useful, effective, or reliable for anybody if I use that in myself. You see, I need to do a little thing to resurrect my friend, and since we have to solve this. See you in Planet Namek of Universe 6. There we can solve this misunderstanding once and for all. I'm waiting for you. Hasta la vista. Broly said, teleport once more in front of everyone's nose. I curse the day this kid learned to teleport, said Kampa, observing with hate the point where Broly had disappeared. The method that Broly talked about when he told them to travel to Planet Namek of Universe 6 was actually resorting to the Dragon Balls. With the Dragon Balls it was possible to make some wish that would allow him to know if someone lies or not, as well as to resurrect Tights, fulfilling his two needs in a single movement. I call this Broly efficiency. Resurrect people, the main use for Dragon Balls throughout the manga, anime, non-canon movies, and canon too. I almost didn't remember how cheap life is Dragon Ball. I'm being very cliché. The reason he chose the Planet Namek of Universe 6 was simple. I couldn't use the Dragon Balls of the Earth, since within a few years for the adventure of Goku and Bulma will begin. This is a critical period that could change many things and he didn't want to risk. Besides, he didn't trust the capabilities of the current Shinran. He couldn't use the Dragon Ball of the Namek 7, since the period of time necessary for them to be operational again after their desire to travel to the Universe 6. He couldn't use the Dragon Ball of the Namek 7, since he still has to wait until they are operational again after wish to travel to the Universe 6 and learn the God idiom. Then, by evident discarding, only those of the Planet Namek of the Universe 6 were left to be used, planet in which, fortunately, he already established an ambassadorship in case he might need them. Broly teleported through his ambassadorship to Planet Namek and began his plan to subtract the Dragon Ball in a discreet and imperceptible way for the Namekians, since he didn't know the reaction they could have if he asked them kindly. They have always been very reluctant to give Dragon Balls to foreigners. Although seeing that throughout the planet people spoke favorably about him because of the recent events that occurred in Universe 6 and that they even sold Broly dolls and another types of merchandising of all sizes and transformations. Oh, I'm flattered, although this flagrantly violates my image rights. Broly changed his mind and proceeded to request it kindly, and the Namekians, upon hearing the reasons why they wanted to use the Dragon Ball, agreed in exchange for certain autographs in Broly's merchandising and other things to promote tourism. Seriously. I'll have to sue the bastard who is getting rich with my image, although that would be another story. After Broly gathered the 7 giant Dragon Balls and quietly chatted a few minutes with his fan club. Whis, Kampa, Shin and Kibito appeared accompanied by Vados. You have taken along. It gave me time to inaugurate a hospital and kiss a child, a green child, said Broly next to the 7 glowing Dragon Balls, which was instantly transformed into true Super Saiyan God full power, his most powerful transformation, sending the message that he didn't trust them either. Kampa was about to complain about his impertinent comment, but Vados stopped him once more. They had already wasted too much time and energy in these matters. Well, if you want we can start, said Broly going towards the Dragon Balls. The sky darkened and a huge, muscular green dragon rose between the clouds. It was Purunga 6. Which was looking down to speak to the person who had summoned him. I'll grant 3 wishes. Tell me what you want, said Purunga 6 in a solemn way. Broly looked back, where was the coalition of deities of various universes. If you excuse me, before solving our doubts I would like to do something more important, said Broly, making appear the corpse of Tights in his arms. Everyone gave his approval, except Kampa, who was about to protest and be into a rage again by his unlimited selfishness, but Vados again stopped him. He was very irascible today and that wouldn't solve anything. Purunga, my first wish is to resurrect this girl that I have in my arms, said Broly pointing to Tights. Very well. I'll try, said Purunga concentrating on doing his homework, and several seconds later he replied, I'm sorry, but it's not possible, I can't find the soul of this girl anywhere. The situation seemed to suddenly become tense. Everyone understood that this would be very hard new for Broly. However, he didn't change his expression too much as if he wasn't surprised or affected, a disappointment, but it was something within my expectations. Broly wasn't surprised in the least. This was the Universe 6 while Tights was from the Universe 7, his soul should be in a different universe, but in the case of Tights there was an additional difficulty. Broly rested the body of Tights on his left arm and raised his right hand in the air. In his hand appeared the head and the trunk of an old humanoid goat seriously wounded and with a very traumatized face. It was Moro, who was still alive. It seemed as if he wasn't fully aware, as if he were catatonic, hypnotized and had lost all the strength. He had become a Yamcha fighting a Saibaman. The soul of the girl is inside this scum. My first wish is to get her soul out of him and the second her resurrection. Will you be able to resurrect Tights now? And do it quickly, that Kampa has very little patience, Broly asked while Porunga tried to see if it was possible observing Kampa with fear. However, Kampa paid no attention to Broly's words or Porunga's reaction when they mentioned him, they stay too focused with something else. You haven't killed him. Him and to all that solar system. Kampa shouted louder than usual, he didn't expect this. That was my first impulse, but, at the last moment I rectified only devouring everything, since there was the possibility that something like this could happen. Besides, he is more useful to me alive than dead, Broly answered with a terrifying smile surprised everyone. This added one more reason to the long list of reasons of why they should not trust our anti-hero. It's okay. I can do it. I'll grant your wish, said Porunga with his big red eyes glowing. Moments later. Tights opened her eyes, looked around and with her usual cheerful tone said with some difficulty, as if she had been stuck in a long nap, where am I? What happened? Broly? You're very changed. I'll explain everything later Tights, but before they could continue with the conversation Broly instantly saved Tights and Moro in the formless realm. He didn't want any more surprises today, especially dealing with the security of Tights, who had already died today once. Very well, let's continue with the next wish, and the reason why you have come here. Porunga. I want you to give us a machine capable of determining if someone is telling the truth or not to any question, a machine that is able to work on anyone regardless of their power, race, intelligence, or position, said Broly formulating his last wish. That is easy. I'll grant your wish, said Porunga with his big red eyes glowing one more time. In a few seconds, a strange machine with a buzzer and an adjustable helmet tied to a cable appeared in front of everyone. Its operation was simple. If a person wearing a helmet said a lie, the bell rings, you must answer yes or no to the question. And after explaining this, Porunga disappeared. Well, you want to test if the machine works before you try it on me? In case you then put the excuse that was tricked, proposed Broly, as if he were a magician delivering a deck of cards to the public to show that there was no trick. He, this seems fun. Let me try, said Kampa, who like a child couldn't resist to try such an interesting toy. Once the helmet was put on, the interrogation began, which enthused many people. This can be fun. I'll start, Vados said with a big smile as she prepared to ask her question. This morning when I gave you the diet lunch, you disintegrated it with Hakai and ate trinkets while I didn't watch? No. 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 Of course not, Kampa shouted with great effusiveness. Grin. Gurn. Grin. Pitched the truth machine. As I suspected, Vados said with great sadness and disappointment while Kampa blushed by the embarrassment and anger he felt. He was beginning to think that it wasn't a good idea to offer himself to try that machine. Now me. Now me. Said Whis very excited to ask his question, are you much weaker than your brother and that's why you always come to bother him due to your complex? No. Of course it's not because of that, it's... Kampa tried to excuse himself, but... Grin. He couldn't fool the machine. Ho, this is super fun, Whis said laughing, putting his hand in front of his mouth. Now me. Said Broly, who never loses a chance to laugh, did you feel humiliated and like a fucking poor little shit when I gave you that beating? Upon hearing that question Kampa became so enraged that he turned red and threatened Broly with his hand as he said. No. You want me to kill? Graif Than. Ahahahahaha. Laughed Broly at the top of his lungs while the rest tried to hold their laughter as best they could. Jarrrrrr. I've gotten tired of this. Kampa shouted furiously, throwing the helmet through the air, helmet which Vados picked up before it got damaged. Now that we have verified that it works, why don't we solve this at once? Vados said, offering the helmet to Broly, which put it on without any problem or complaint, and started the interrogation to prove his innocence. Everyone except Broly was very tense. The decisive moment was here, the moment they had been waiting for so long, that day. Vados with great anticipation asked, "Are you a time traveler?" "No, I'm not," said Broly too calmly, as if he had simply been asked if he preferred Coke or Pepsi. Whis, Kampa, Vados, Shin and Kibito upon hearing the answer, at a great speed turned their heads to the truth machine. And to their surprise, there was no reaction on the machine. There was no sound. Which meant that Broly was telling the truth. Is he really not responsible for creating a time ring? So, who created that ring? And how are the different Broly explained? Well, you want to ask me something else? Broly said with satisfaction with the helmet still on his head. Yes, I have one. Everything you told us before in the Universe 7 was true. Shin asked with cold sweat falling from his forehead. It was probable that he had not traveled in time personally, but he really did not have information about the future. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.